Hello. Welcome to Chico, California State Life Sketches podcast. Today we're visiting with Lance Atkins. Welcome, Lance.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks.
So let's start off with maybe you could tell us where were you born and raised?
Yeah, I was born in Moscow, Idaho. My parents were both students at University of Idaho, and I was born near the end of their time at University of Idaho. My parents are both from Idaho. They're from south central Idaho, a little farm town called Buell, Idaho. And they went to school up there at University of Idaho. Shortly after I was born, though, we moved to Moses Lake, Washington. That was where my dad's first job was out of college.
Mm-hmm.
After that, my family moved around some. We lived in Moses Lake for a while. We lived in the Tri-Cities for several years. My dad's job eventually took him back to Twin Falls, Idaho, which is just outside of Buell, Idaho. It's the same area, south central Idaho. We thought we'd be there forever. That was when I was 11 that we moved there. But 2 years later, things changed with my dad's job, and we moved back to Kennewick, Washington, which was the Tri-Cities. So we were there for 2 years, and then when I was 15, finally we moved to Twin Falls again, and my parents have been there ever since. And so I went to high school in Twin Falls, Idaho. When people ask me where I'm from, I usually say southern Idaho. But half or more of my childhood, I was raised in the Tri-Cities, Washington. So.
Good. Okay, so tell us about your siblings, maybe their names, and also your parents' names.
Yeah, so my dad is Robert Atkins, and my mom is Lori, and they have 6 kids. I'm the oldest of 6 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I was born when they were in college. So my siblings' names, I have a sister, Kara. Most of my siblings are married at this point. My sister Kara is married and lives in Sandy, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And then my sister Carly, she lives in Pocatello with her husband and their 5 children. My sister Alyssa is the next one, so I had 3 sisters right after me. My sister Alyssa also lives in Sandy, Utah. She lives a couple blocks away from my sister, so that's pretty fun for them. And then I have 2 brothers at the end, and my first brother, that's the 5th out of 6, he's married with 3 children, lives, or 3 or 4, something like that. I lose track of them. There's a lot of them. I forget how many grandkids my parents have. I think they have 21 grandkids or something like that. So he lives in Burley, Idaho. He's an attorney there, public defender. And then my youngest brother is not married. He's 27 or 28 or so, and he lives in Pocatello. Actually works for the same business that my sister's husband owns and operates. And so, yeah.
Nice.
One big happy family. We're, to this day, still pretty close family. We get together at least once a year. Honestly, I think we get together twice a year. We always have one party together around Christmas time or Thanksgiving. And then we always get together once a year in the summer as well for, a solid 4-day weekend or something like that.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, tell us about maybe some activities you had in school or interests you had.
Yeah, when I was growing up, the number one thing for me above everything else was sports. That was everything I cared about was sports. From the time I was a little kid, I loved all the regular sports. I loved baseball, basketball. Baseball was kind of my first love. When I got to be a teenager, between my 8th grade year and my 9th grade year, I grew 6 inches, and suddenly I was a little bit better at basketball, and so I tended to trend towards basketball a little bit more. I was never an elite athlete by any means, and so I don't have any stories of winning state championships or any major trophies to show for it, but that was all I cared about as a kid. My thing was every single morning as a kid, from the time I was probably 7 or 8 years old, I would run outside and get the newspaper. Even if it was snowy, I'd run out in bare feet and grab the newspaper, and then I would just pore over the box scores from the day before and look at the statistics. Usually, like in the Sunday paper, they print all the statistics of like Major League Baseball. They would print, the batting averages and home run leaders and RBI leaders and ERA leaders. And I could usually tell you, any given player, what his statistics were at a given time. I remember being in 8th grade once. We were arguing about sports in a locker room at one point, arguing about something going on, and I was spouting off some kind of statistics, and finally some friend kind of said condescendingly to me, "Lance, nobody cares about all the statistics you know." And that really hurt my feelings at the time. I think I've got over it. The funny thing is now, we'll talk about my kids later, but I have 2 boys. They're the 2 oldest. And as they became teenagers, they kind of got more and more into sports, and they maybe have some of the same traits as me. And I remember several times just walking around the house, and I'd have one of them following me, just spouting off the statistics of a certain player. You know, we love the Detroit Tigers in baseball, and they would just spout off everything to me, and I would think, oh, this is what I sounded like as a kid. I get it now. So, but that's been pretty fun.
That's great. Okay, so now after high school, did you choose to go to college?
I did, yeah. So after high school, I went to Idaho State University for 1 year. I had a couple of good friends that were going there. I didn't quite know what I wanted to study yet at that point in life. Well, I thought I wanted to be a sports writer at that time. I thought I was going to work for Sports Illustrated or something. So I think I started out studying mass communications, which that didn't last very long. But yeah, I did 1 year at Idaho State University, which is in Pocatello. That's about an hour and a half away from Twin Falls.
So you did 1 year, and then what did you choose to do?
Yeah, so when I turned 19, I served a mission for the church, and I went to Lima, Peru. I was called to Lima, Peru. That was in August of 2001 when I left on that mission. But when I was in the MTC, we found out that there was like 32 of us that entered the MTC on the same day going to Peru, some type of mission in Peru.
Uh-huh.
My entire district there, all 10 of us were all going to the same mission, Lima Central, but none of us got our visas. And so I did 5.5 months in Des Moines, Iowa. And when I was in Des Moines, Iowa, after a while, you're there for 4 or 5 months, you start to kind of accept that, well, maybe this is where my mission's going to be. Mm-hmm. And at 5.5 months, I actually got a letter from church headquarters that had Gordon B. Hinckley's signature or stamp on it that said, hey, you've been permanently reassigned to the Des Moines, Iowa mission, that your visas didn't come through. Oddly enough, 3 days after that, I got a phone call from Salt Lake City, and someone said, hey, we know we sent you that letter, but actually your visas came through the day after we sent those letters out. So you have the option. You can choose to go to Lima, or if you want to stay in Iowa, you can. And I remember thinking, I loved Iowa at that point. I had completely accepted it and loved it and felt like I was where I was supposed to be. So I remember I thought, well, I'll call you back. And at that time, you didn't call your parents much, but they said, you can call your parents and talk about it. So I called them, and I think one of them said, well, Lance, you don't get that many opportunities to go to Peru. And I said, yeah, you're right. So I called him back and said, yeah, let's go. And literally, I think the next day, it was probably 2 or 3 days later, I don't remember, but I was on a plane to Peru for my mission. So.
Wow. Did you have any special experiences there?
I had a lot of really special experiences in both places. For me, the mission was probably the number one thing that I learned on my mission. I felt like was just the potential that I had as a person. I was a pretty average student. I mentioned earlier I was a pretty average athlete. Mm-hmm. But I felt like on my mission it just gave me so many opportunities to see what the Lord can do for you when you really apply yourself, when you are obedient to the Lord's commandments. On the mission, there's obviously a lot of rules that can be confusing at times, but for me, I just had so many different experiences when I just saw the blessings that came from really applying ourselves to try and follow Him. And so, for me, I learned a lot of lessons in leadership. And I also learned that the Lord can work in mysterious ways. It's a big moment when you open your mission call and you see where you're called to. And especially if it's a foreign mission, it's exciting, and you see, oh, wow, I'm going to Peru. And to some, it may sound confusing that you're just permanently reassigned to Iowa. And yet for me, I never had this moment of, what in the world, how was I called to Peru, but then ended up in Iowa? It still just kind of seemed like part of God's plan. And I'm incredibly grateful that I kind of got to serve two different missions. I got to see what a stateside mission was like, what living in the Midwest was like, what the people were like in the Midwest. I loved those people. Ironically enough, later in my career, I spent a lot of time in Iowa, and I was already kind of familiar with the area because of my mission. And then I got to see what it was like to serve in Peru as well. And so just the adaptability of being able to serve in two different places and learn to love two different types of people, lots of different types of people. Obviously, there's more than two types of people, but you get what I'm saying.
I do.
So.
Well, there are a lot of blessings for obedience that the Lord just lines up those opportunities for us that you've experienced, but you learned that at a young age. So that's great. So after your mission, then did you go back to college?
I did. So late in my mission, I had a kind of a funny experience. When I was growing up in Kennewick, Washington, I had a really, really good friend. I mean, he was my best friend growing up as a kid. And this is a life sketch, so I might as well put him in it. You know, his name was Ben Zindri. But when we moved away from Kennewick for the final time, sophomore, junior, senior year of high school, more or less lost touch with him. We didn't chat or anything at that time. But late in my mission, he was on a mission as well. He was in Brazil, and he sent me a letter out of nowhere. He managed to get somehow where I was from somebody and sent me a letter and said, "Hey, I'm going to BYU, Idaho. We should room together at BYU." We wrote a few letters back and forth, and he said, "Hey, we should room together. Let's get the show back on the road, you know." And so my sister, who was 2 years younger than me, had started attending BYU, Idaho while I was on my mission. And so she arranged a place for us to live at, and I ended up rooming with my best friend from when I was a child at BYU, Idaho, which was amazing. That was some of the funnest times of my life was there. But yeah, after my mission, I went to BYU, Idaho, and I studied agronomy there, which was agricultural. It's a study of agricultural science, ag business, science, and technology. And that's where I met my wife as well.
And tell us her name and where were you married?
Yeah, so I met my wife. Her name is Melissa. Her name was Melissa Borup, you know, before I met her, and we met in Rexburg. I met her, I guess embarrassingly, 2 weeks after my mission. I met her. We went to some of the wards in Rexburg. They have, I think BYU probably does the same, but they have, what was it called? Ward prayer. So they have a ward prayer where on a Sunday night you get together as a ward and you have a prayer. And my sister and I think my wife would even make fun of those ward prayers at times, as they would say it was just one more chance for people to meet each other and potentially get married. That is how we ended up meeting, and that led to our eventual marriage. But I saw her at ward prayer and really wanted to talk to her because I thought she was beautiful. And at that time in my life, like I said, I was average in most things in life. I had not had much success in my pursuits of the opposite sex earlier in life, but she was willing to talk to me. She talked and talked and talked and talked. I thought, this is fantastic. I found out later that she talks and talks and talks to everybody that she comes into contact with. But I just kept her on the line long enough that eventually we were able to get married there. And we got married in the Logan Temple. My parents were married in the Logan Temple, and her parents were married in the Logan Temple. At that time, Idaho only had two temples. You had Idaho Falls and you had Boise, and then Logan was about the same distance away as any of those temples from where I lived. Her extended family was from Logan. So for us, the Logan Temple had kind of a special significance in that we just had so much family history there at the Logan Temple, and I love that temple.
It is a beautiful temple.
Yeah.
Okay, so then you graduated from college. Tell us about that and where that career took you.
Yeah, so I was studying ag science. A funny story, actually, before I graduated, it was shortly after we got married. I did an internship in Rupert, Idaho, which is just outside of Burley. I worked for a large, at that time, 15,000 acre potato and sugar beet farm. And so I was working for them as an internship. We'd only been married for 4 months, and so my wife and I both moved there. She took a semester off of school to go with me while I did that internship, and we lived in this really crummy old single-wide trailer. There's nothing wrong with single-wide trailers, but this one was really old and really crummy and really different than how she had ever lived, for sure. You know, it had problems with mice and rats and heating and all sorts of problems. But she was very, very willing to go do this. Yeah, she made a big sacrifice for me to do this. But there was one time when our car broke down while we were there, and so the farm let me drive one of their farm trucks. And I had to go pick her up from something that day. And I remember I picked her up, and it was this old, beat-up Ford truck. And we were driving down a dirt road, and I had my window down, and I thought, I have made it in life. This is everything I ever dreamed of. Like, I'm living the country song. I'm driving down the dirt road in my Ford, window down. This is as good as it gets. And I found out not too long after that she was having the exact opposite feelings, and that she was thinking, this is a nightmare that I'm living through, and what decisions did I make to get to this point? But we've come to a pretty good place in life to where I still get to work in agriculture, which I love and I'm very passionate about. We don't have to live out in the boonies. We get to live in, we'll talk about some of the places where or I guess I could talk about it now. But
just tell us where
we've been able to live in a lot of different places. After college, we moved to California for a couple of years. That was down in the Madera area outside of Fresno. And then we moved back to Idaho for just 2 years. I thought that would kind of be my forever job in Idaho. It was half a mile from my parents' house. That job did not work out. That was a job that was in sales, and it turned out I was not good at sales at all. And so they let me go after a couple of years, which was, at the time, just felt like such a crushing blow to you know, my self-confidence and my ego. But it, like a lot of these stories, it turned out to be the best thing that ever happened for me. You know, from there, I kind of realized, okay, maybe my strength is not in sales, and I applied for a lot of different jobs at the time. And we ended up moving to Hawaii, and I moved into more of a production role. And so in Hawaii, we were there for about 5 years. We lived on 2 different islands while we were there. It was the best. It was as amazing as you might think it is. When we moved there, we had a 2-year-old and a 2-month-old. We had one more child while we were there. And after about 5 years there, as good as it was, as amazing as it was kind of time to come back to the mainland and be closer to family and live somewhere where it was a little bit more affordable. So at that point, the company that I worked for had a job in California, and that was just outside of Chico that led us to Chico. That was in 2014. So about 11 years ago, we moved to Chico, California. I continued working for that company for about 5 years. And then after that, we almost moved to Chicago, Illinois. And through kind of a miraculous, a few different things that happened there, I ended up getting a different job with a company called Capay Farms here just outside of our office is just outside of Hamilton City. And so I've been there for about 5 years as well, and it's been incredible. We love Chico. Chico is kind of the perfect place for us. So like I said, my wife maybe thought, this is a nightmare. I can't believe I'm living in a single-wide trailer in the middle of nowhere. But in the end, we got to live in California. We got to live in Hawaii. She gets to live in Chico, this beautiful place that has the things that she wants, while I still get to work for a farm that's just outside of Chico. So it's worked out really well for us. We've been very lucky. So,
Oh, that's wonderful.
yeah.
So along these travels, you've added children to your family. Tell us about each of them.
Yeah, so our oldest is Will. He's a senior in high school, and he actually just put his mission papers in 3 days ago. So
Great.
we are, as of right now, on watch for when that mission call comes in. Our youngest is a kindergartner. Her name is Wendy. I didn't go in order there, but it's just kind of an interesting time of life right now because we have a kindergartner and we have a senior in high school. So we have the full width. But yeah, Will is our oldest. He's 17 and a senior in high school. Porter is our next child. He is a sophomore in high school. He's about to turn 16. And then Madeline is in the middle. Madeline is in 6th grade. She's our only middle schooler right now. She's 11, about to turn 12. Audrey and Wendy both go to Sierra View. They're in elementary school. So Audrey is 9. and Wendy is 6. And yeah, let's see. Will was born in California. Porter was in Idaho. Madeline was in Hawaii. And then the last 2 were born here in Chico. So we've been very lucky with them. I guess the story that I'll add there is all of our kids, 4 of our 5 kids came early. And Will came very early. Will was the first one. We went actually to visit Melissa's sister who lives in the Bay Area, and we went to a San Francisco Giants game one night. When we came back from that San Francisco Giants game, she was 6 to 7 weeks before full term, and she ended up going into labor. And Will was in the NICU in Walnut Creek for 19 days, I think. And then the rest of them kind of came early as well. The only one that didn't come early was Madeline. And the story that I thought I'd share there, Madeline was in the middle, and she came when we were in Hawaii. That was an amazing time in Hawaii, but there was a stretch. It was amazing, but it was also very difficult at times. That's where I worked on my master's degree, was while I was there. I also had probably foolishly agreed to help coach a high school basketball team, and then work was extremely busy as well. I just had a lot going on at work at that time, and a lot of opportunities there. Most days there I would leave when it was dark and come home when it was dark, and I don't think I'm exaggerating there. So it was just a really difficult time, and when she was pregnant with Wendy, there was just this constant, she had a very, very, very difficult with Madeline because she worried so much about going into preterm labor, and because I wasn't around much.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she worried the entire time, had a very difficult time with that pregnancy, but for whatever reason, I was working on my last classes for my master's degree, and there was one day where I told her I have to take this test and then I'm done. But she had made it to full term somehow with that one. Mm-hmm. And I went and I took that test. I had to go take it somewhere else. And I took the test, and at this point she was actually 3 days past due. And I took the test, and I came home, and I remember I walked onto our deck, and she opened the door, and she said, my water just broke. And it was just this incredible miracle because the next 2 children came early as well. Our last child was in the NICU for 9 days because she came early. But that one child, at kind of that most difficult, busy time of life, it was just incredible to me that her water broke when I walked up onto the deck after finishing that test and being done with school. It was, to me, fairly miraculous.
You were given a gift.
We were for that one, yeah.
Well, you have a full life with a beautiful family. You're rich with children.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you would care to add and tell our viewers that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, I would just say, you kind of said it there at the end, that you have a full life and you're rich with things. And I read a writer that I read once said that he was born rich in terms of the things that matter in life. Mm-hmm. And I was given everything that I ever needed from the time that I was born. You know, I was given my parents were incredibly faithful when it came to their testimonies of the church, incredibly hardworking as well. I learned so much from both of them. And then somehow in life, despite all the times that I do stupid things and do things the wrong way, I just keep stumbling into good situations. I stumbled into this wife that's an incredibly wonderful person and a kind person, and we have these wonderful children. But what I would say more than anything that I would like to share is there's people that are given gifts, different spiritual gifts, right? And mm-hmm. I have been given many of those spiritual gifts, but one of the gifts that as a young child that I just felt like I didn't have was believing automatically, and having automatic faith never came supernatural to me. I used to lie awake in bed wondering if it was all true, wondering if my parents really believed all this stuff, and I had a hard time with that. And I just feel at this stage of life so incredibly lucky and so incredibly blessed that because of the fact that I was able to serve a mission and kind of put some of these things to the test, and then because of the things that I've been able to experience after my mission with my family, as we just continue to try and be faithful, all the different miracles we've seen, that I have been given this incredible gift of faith at this point in life, that I look back and go, this is just amazing that at this point in life, I have this faith that I feel like is unshakable, and I hope that can be passed down to my children, just like my parents' faith was kind of over time, not immediately passed down to me. I don't feel like I was born with it, but over time I was able to receive that gift. So that would be probably the last thing to share.
You had a nurturing environment to learn that with your parents' example, and you're doing the same thing for your children now. So thank you so much, Lance, for being willing to share with us your story. I know it's just a brief overview, but we really do appreciate you coming to share with us today.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.